Hey guys, how you doing? Dr. Shaun here. So today we're going to talk about something that I love to talk about, and that is how to get a perfect match for your anterior restorations. And it makes the dentist happy, it makes the patient happy, it makes the lab happy, and it saves time and money. So when a patient comes into the office and they want any kind of work on the anterior teeth, it's our job to make sure it's very aesthetically pleasing. So to do that, we have to make sure that the veneers or crowns that we fabricate have a complete perfect match to any patient's existing restorations or existing teeth. So shade matching is not as easy as you think for anterior restorations. It's not about just holding up one of the tabs from a Vita shade guide and telling the lab, okay, the crown or veneer is going to be an A2, A3. Teeth have a variety and blend of shades. So you need multiple tabs, you need multiple shades in order to really fabricate something that's going to look pretty similar to someone's existing dentition. Okay? So today I'm going to go over some tips and tricks on what I do in order to get a perfect shade match. The very first and most vital step in this entire procedure is to make sure the dentist has a clear communication with the lab. Whether it be pictures, whether it be discussing on the phone, whether it be writing it down on a lab slip, we have to make sure there's a close relationship and clear communication between the dentist and the lab, okay? The next step is taking great pictures. We have to make sure that the pictures are very clear and in focus for the lab to really see all the detail in the patient's existing teeth, so we can get a closest match as possible to the veneers and or the crowns. This is a very important step, and I hope all you guys out there really purchase one after I talk about this. This makes a difference, especially if you're doing any type of all ceramic restorations where there's gonna be a little show through from the prep tooth structure. So especially veneers, how veneers are so thin, this is gonna be important because when the veneers are so thin, whatever the shade of the underlying tooth structure is, we can show through a little bit. So even if you match the outer tooth perfectly, the crown or the veneer will come back and the shade will be off. It's because, most importantly, you have to take the shade of the stump. So we call this stump shade because it's the shade of the underlying prep tooth structure. So after you finish prepping your crown or prepping your veneer, you have to make sure you're also not only taking the shade of the existing teeth, but you're also taking a shade of the stump. Now, this is what I use. It's called natural dye material. It's going to give me all the different types of stump shade. So stump shade is ND, natural dye, and it goes from 1 all the way to 9. Okay? So put this up to the tooth. Again, don't just use one. Use more than one. Send it to the lab. The more information the lab gets, the better the final product. So it's very important that we go ahead and take a stump shade guide. Alrighty, so the next one is a very important step. It's obviously picking out the shade of the tooth, okay? Now again, like I said before, teeth are not just one shade. So this Vita shade guide, you're not gonna just pick out A2, put it up to the patient's mouth, take a picture, and send it to the lab. You might pick out an A2, an A3, or an A1, even put them together, and take a picture of all of them together in front of the patient's tooth and send it to the lab. It's much better for the lab to see and compare the different shade guides to the patient's existing teeth. Now, if you have the Vita shade guide, that's fine. There's a bunch of different shades, just make sure you're using more than one. But what I also like to use sometimes is the Vita Master Shade Guide. So here, you actually will be able to break it down into chroma, hue, value of a tooth. So it's much more in detail, but both of them work for the lab. I've used the Vita Classical Shade Guide for the lab. I've also used the Master Shade Guide. Next important tip is that you really have a good camera, okay? I use a Canon EOS Rebel. We need to make sure we're getting a lot of detail. We need to make sure we see that texture, that translucency, those different shades, the size, the shape, all that stuff. That's important in order to get a really perfect match to a patient's existing teeth. So a good camera is going to be key. So those are my tips and tricks to getting a perfect shade match for any anterior restorations. It's very important to take these steps because if you take all these steps, what's happened is you're gonna get a result from the lab that's gonna come back almost perfect. And if for some reason it needs a little adjustment, you can always send it back to the lab and they can fine tune it. But if a patient has to come in like 3, 4, 5 times because the shade's still not matching, then it's not gonna cost you time and money, but they're gonna be unhappy. They won't be referring any patients, you're gonna be unhappy, and it's just gonna be a horrible situation. So go ahead, use these steps, get that perfect shade match to your anterior restorations, and let's do this.